Shalom! How are you doing, my friend? Oh my god, you look great! I love what you're doing with your hair. If you're familiar with my face, that means that you may have seen some other videos, including me trying out some Israeli snacks and even Israeli music. But today, we are going to dive into something that I've been curious and I've been meaning to learn more about. However, I have been a little bit nervous about the topic. Just know that I'm going into this video with absolutely no knowledge whatsoever when it comes to Israeli history. All I know is that Hebrew is one of the languages there. Of course, Judaism is practiced. And of course, I know that there's a conflict at this time. So today, we are going to be learning about the history of Israel by a channel called Mr. History, which does a phenomenal job putting together these educational videos about several countries all around the globe.
This is the Middle East, and here's Israel. Now let's go, shall we? Israel's history is exceptionally ancient, with the semi-nomadic Natufian culture boasting the oldest evidence of beer making in the world. Good to know early humans had their priorities right. The years passed,
Damn straight they
and one of the
did.
world's oldest cities was constructed, Jericho. During the Bronze Age, we spy the rise of a Semitic-speaking city-dwelling people called the Canaanites, and the land came to be known as Canaan. These Canaanites were very likely among the Hyksos folk, who gained control over northern Egypt in the 1600s BC, ruling till they were expelled by Ahmose I around a century later. Meanwhile, we observe another people group in the land of Canaan, whose first mention is on the Egyptian Merneptah stele of the 1200s BC, a humble tribal confederation of shepherds called Israel. The Israelites, also known as Hebrews, were unique among all the nations around them in that they did not worship an extensive pantheon of deities, but rather one god, and while their neighbors built grandiose monuments of brick and stone, Israel's glory was in words. The Hebrew Bible would change the world in the way an obelisk never could, by inspiring the mind and soul with thoughts that have gripped and shaken the hearts of billions up to this very day. The Hebrew Bible is called the Tanakh, and the first 5 books of it are called the Torah. It recounts how Abraham was called by God to travel from his home in Ur to the land of Canaan, which was promised to him and his descendants forever. This divinely sanctioned real estate deal was repeated to Abraham's son Isaac and to his son Jacob, who was renamed Israel. Jacob had 12 sons, whose families became the 12 tribes of Israel. After centuries of servitude in Egypt, they were delivered by Moses, who led the people to the brink of the promised land Canaan, which was subsequently conquered by his successor Joshua. The biblical books go on to describe Israel's incessant squabbles and conflict with surrounding peoples, the most troublesome being the Philistines, who are commonly believed to have been among the marauding sea peoples who troubled the eastern Mediterranean during the end of the Bronze Age. Ramses III of Egypt fended them off in the 1100s BC, but the Israelites were not so successful, and the first king of Israel, Saul, committed suicide after losing to the Philistines at the Battle of Gilboa. But things changed under King David, who became the benchmark of Israelite kingly greatness. David's story, as recounted in the books of Samuel and Chronicles, is one of military success and territorial expansion, one of his most celebrated feats being the conquest of a city called Jerusalem, which became his capital. Under David's son Solomon, the kingdom of Israel is described as having attained its zenith of wealth, power, and magnificence. Solomon built the legendary temple where the Israelites worshipped and sacrificed to God according to the laws of Moses. It also housed the Ark of the Covenant, the golden chest containing the 10 Commandments. Though Solomon was renowned for being wise, his son was otherwise. Rehoboam's refusal to reduce taxes led to most of the 12 tribes breaking away from the union under the leadership of Jeroboam, who became the king of the north. So the state was split in two, with Israel up the top and Judah down the bottom. The term Jew derives from Judah. This divided era was a sort of golden age of prophets who arose to warn the people that they would be punished for their wickedness, but also brought the consolatory news that one day a Messiah would arise and be their savior. The northern kingdom lasted 2 centuries before being conquered by the Assyrians in the 720s BC. The only surviving image of an Israelite king is this unflattering depiction of Jehu bowing before Assyria's Shalmaneser III. The biblical authors depict Judah.
You just had to throw that in there.
The prophets had spoken, judgment awaited, and in 586 BC the Babylonians swept in and destroyed the temple and carried off numbers of Jews to Babylon. Around 538 BC, after he had conquered Babylon, Persia's Cyrus the Great issued a decree that permitted the Jews to return to their home and rebuild the temple, which they did. So the land continued as a Persian province until the 330s BC, when Alexander the Great marched in and established Greek rule. Grecian culture appealed to many Jews, and things were going pretty well under Antiochus III here, but his son proved a nightmare for the Jewish people. Antiochus Epiphanes initiated an all-out attack on the Jewish religion, which in turn provoked a furious revolt in 167 BC BC, which succeeded in gaining independence for Judea. The warrior priest Judas Maccabeus cleansed the profaned temple and rededicated it to the God of Israel, an event remembered annually by Jewish people at Chanukah. So Judea was free, but not free from problems, like quarrels.
That's how that came to be.
And after a civil war, the land fell to the Romans. It officially became a province in 6 AD. Meanwhile, a baby had been born in a village called Bethlehem, who grew up to be so enormously influential, many consider him the most momentous figure in all history. Of course, this was Yeshua, Jesus, whose miraculous ministry during the reign of Tiberius drew a fervid following around him, but also many enemies. After being falsely accused, he was crucified and buried, but after witnesses declared he had risen from the dead, and these same witnesses willingly suffered horrendous deaths for their faith, it was clear something big was happening. Devoted Jews began preaching the gospel, the good news of Jesus, whom they declared to be the Christ, the Messiah, and none did so more effectively than Paul of Tarsus, whose letters to the churches he founded contained the core of Christian doctrine, a faith that spread all through the Roman Empire and beyond, and went on to become the biggest religion in the world.
So in short, from what I'm understanding, it seems like Israel started coming together the moment that they got their king David, this influential king that not only got them Jerusalem, but of course then had kids, specifically Solomon, and Solomon became also king, and then he established pretty much the Temple of Solomon. So it seems like King David and King Solomon actually kickstarted Israel by bringing it wealth and all sorts of other goods. So far, so good.
Now, while the first Christians were all Jews, it soon became clear that the majority of the children of Israel did not accept Yeshua, and were meanwhile growing more and more fed up with Roman rule. And you better believe there was war. In 70 AD, after years of fierce fighting, the Romans under future Emperor Titus captured Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, burned the city, and enslaved the populace. Jewish rebels famously continued the struggle at the siege of Masada, where according to Josephus, they chose to kill themselves rather than surrender. In 132, the Jews revolted again, and this time Rome's fury knew no bounds, and after crushing the revolt and killing over 500,000 Jews and selling more into slavery, they renamed the region Syrian Palestine. The name Palestine derived from the Philistines, and was how the Greeks had referred to the land. Now, while communities of Jews continued to live in Palestine, most were scattered abroad, and remained so for many centuries. The 7th century saw the region conquered by the Muslim Arabs, who constructed the Dome of the Rock Shrine and Al-Aqsa Mosque on the mount where Solomon's temple once stood. Non-Muslims were forced to pay the jizya poll tax. Jews had to wear yellow and Christians had to wear blue. Muslim rule continued until 1099, when the European forces of the
so almost like a segregation of some kind.
Taking Jerusalem amid much slaughter and establishing a Christian kingdom under Baldwin I. 88 years later, the Sultan of Egypt, Saladin, re-established Muslim rule, instigating the Third Crusade, which ended with a truce. In 1244, Jerusalem was destroyed by the Turkic clan ruling Persia, and then the Mongols invaded before the Mamluk sultans of Egypt returned, who reigned until 1517, when the Ottoman Turks took over. Under the Ottomans, Palestine enjoyed some prosperity until the 1600s. The Arab ruler Zahir al-Omar carved out a Palestinian sheikhdom, which he defended and enriched before being killed by the Ottomans in 1775. The next governor succeeded with British aid.
This was all really bloody. Wow.
As the 19th century progressed, a movement called Zionism was born in Europe that sought the creation of a Jewish state in Palestine. Boats of Jewish immigrants began arriving, and the resurrection of the ancient Hebrew language began. During World War I, the Arabs helped the British against the Turks, and it seemed clear that Arab independence would be assured. But all Arabian faces fell when it was revealed the British had no intention of granting the Arabs sovereignty, and instead planned to partition the Near East between themselves and France. Those same Arabian faces reddened in rage after the Balfour Declaration publicly declared Britain's support for a Jewish state in Palestine. After the war, the British governed the land, and the Palestinian Arabs, dreading the prospect of being subjects in a Jewish state, began rioting and killing Jews. So the Jews formed a paramilitary to defend themselves. The 1920s and 30s saw hundreds of thousands of Jews arriving from Europe, many of them frightened by the rise of Hitler. The Palestinians ignited a ferocious revolt which saw thousands of Palestinians killed, and regional tenseness intensified. The British restricted Jewish immigration to appease the Arabs, but this only enraged the militant Zionists, who began killing Arabs. The Jewish desire for a nation redoubled when reports surfaced after World War II of millions of Jews butchered by the Nazis in Europe. Murderous Zionist attacks against the British ensued, and everything was a disastrous, tangled mess. In 1947, the UN called for Palestine to be divided, with a state for the Jews and a state for the Arabs, with Jerusalem to be a neutral international zone. The Jews said yes, the Arabs said no. To resolve this, the two sides sat down over a nice cup of tea, and no, of course they didn't. War is what happened, a hard-fought struggle that saw Jewish victory and a mass Palestinian exodus out of the land. On the 14th of May 1948, the head of the Jewish agency, David Ben-Gurion, announced the establishment of the State of Israel, himself becoming Prime Minister. The Arab Arabs of surrounding nations were as outraged as the Palestinians, and the very next day Syria, Egypt, Iraq and the Transjordan invaded, and it was war again, and Israel won again, conquering more land in the process, while Egypt took the Gaza Strip and Jordan took the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Multitudes of Jews worldwide began moving into the newborn nation, and the economy was in shambles, though things improved after Germany sent reparation money. In 1967, Egypt began mobilizing troops on the Israeli border, but what followed no one saw coming. With astonishing efficiency, Israel struck first, and in 6 days utterly thrashed the Egyptian, Syrian and Jordanian militaries, conquering Sinai, Gaza, the West Bank and Golan Heights. Israel's swift victory left the humiliated Arab world shocked and livid. Palestinians escalated attacks against Israelis, leading to Israel bombing PLO HQs. But on Judaism's most holy day in 1973, Egypt and Syria initiated a surprise attack, and it was war again. Israel scrambled to counter the Egyptian offensive and ended up triumphant once more. The late 1970s saw Israel and Egypt make peace, Israel giving back Sinai. But the Palestinians continued their attacks on Israelis, including one that left multiple children dead, which prompted Israel to attack their bases in South Lebanon. All of this solved nothing, and the hostilities continued. 1987 saw a fiery Palestinian uprising against Israel's occupation of Gaza and the West Bank, which is where most Palestinians lived, alongside accumulated Palestinian grievances of mistreatment by Israelis. The UN agreed and condemned Israel for excessive use of force. The Oslo Accords granted Palestinians partial governing authority in the West Bank and Gaza. These concessions saw Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin assassinated by a nationalist Jew. Both sides failed to come to an agreement at the Camp David summit, and after Israel's Ariel Sharon dared to visit the Temple Mount, the Palestinians erupted in revolt again. Palestinian rockets and suicide bombers, and Israeli tanks and attack helicopters, and thousands of deaths. In 2005, Israel withdrew from Gaza, effectively giving the Palestinians control of the Strip. Then there was war with Lebanon that ended in stalemate. Meanwhile, the militant Palestinian nationalist organization Hamas had taken power in Gaza, leading Israel to tightly restrict access to and from the area. Palestinians fired rockets into Israel, and Israel responded with fire of its own. And who would have guessed it? Another war! Israel won again, with few casualties compared to over 1,000 Palestinian deaths. After Hamas members kidnapped and killed 3 Israeli teenagers, IDF forces began a hunt for those responsible, leading to more Hamas rocket fire, leading to, I won't even give you one guess, war! By this time, Israel, a world leader in military technology and innovation, had unveiled its Iron Dome defense system, which intercepts and destroys enemy rockets. The US formally recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, and Israel improved relations with Arab League nations. But Israel's story is far from over, and right now it enjoys a very high level of human development and an advanced economy and high quality of life.
I am literally speechless. I guess I'll just start off by chunking away at the new pieces of information that I learned off of this video. There has been significantly much more war than I had noticed or had learned about, to be honest with you. That took me by total surprise. And at some point, Mr. History actually started, kind of making a joke about it. And I felt bad for laughing because the war is no fun. I almost have a really hard time believing that it is 2023 and this could still happen in this modern day. So I'm going to try to talk about this in the most objective way that I can possible, as once again I understand that religion is a very complicated thing and it has layers to it, so I can never get all of that down, especially with just a little commentary video here on YouTube. As you guys already can know and see and obviously could tell, I am not a religious person to begin with. Because of a person that was born in the country of Israel, there was a rise in following when it came to a new religion, and that of course caused a lot of internal issues, which I could see how it turned into anger and confusion along the way over a long period of time. I could see how other forms of government were established and then divided in a very one-of-a-kind way, a very unique way, for a lack of better words. On one hand, you have one of the largest religions that, of course, surrounds all of us. I think I heard in the video being said like 80 or 90% of the world. And then on the other hand, you have an origin story, an original, that of course doesn't want to be diluted by anything else, but in the process has had to share more of its identity than I think that itself wanted to. Quite truthfully, I am very terrified to ask you guys to leave a comment down below. So what I will have you do is smash the like button if you feel like I got a better understanding of the history of Israel in addition to some of the things that have happened within the country. On a lighter note, we could always chat on Instagram. It's always cool getting the opportunity to connect with you on there. But here on screen, you should see a more upbeat video, something along the lines of like, you know, Israeli snacks, or maybe even the music series. It's much more lighthearted. I think you'll like it. And there's also a playlist. One of these should be a playlist. Okay? Appreciate you guys sticking around. You guys are thebomb.com, and I will see you on the next one. Ciao.